Thank you, everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and we hope that you change your lives for the better. Is that the plan?
Yeah, I can see like the first three rows. I'm not sure there are people. They're here? Okay,
They're back
good.
there. They're the ones that could afford the seats where they can't be asked questions. I actually want to start with 3 questions for everyone. Do me a favor, raise your hand if you know pretty much what the price of gas per gallon is to fill up a car. Okay. Keep your hands up if you know pretty much what the price per gallon is to heat your home. Okay. Raise your hand if you use a credit card. Raise your hand if at the end of the month you know exactly what your credit card bill will be. Okay. Raise your hand if sometime in the last week you promised yourself you would get some exercise. Okay. Okay. Keep your hand up if raising your hand is the most exercise you've gotten this week. So I ask these questions to show how it is difficult to think about money. How even when we think we know what we're doing, thinking about gas, we realize we're not thinking about all gas. How it's difficult to think about issues like self-control and even making promises to ourselves. And that's what our book, Dollars and Cents, available now, is about the way that we misthink money. But our book is hopeful, right? It's not just you're doing terrible things, it's you're doing these things. Let's be aware of it so that we can then improve. So before we get too deep into all of the ways we misthink money and all of the science behind it, all of the stories, I'm going to throw it over and I'm going to have Dan give us just 2 quick tips for how we can improve our lives, improve our thinking about money. And so now this is Dan Ariely. This is Dan.
Ariely. So the first one might not be so quick. So there is this thing called adaptation. And adaptation is the idea that we get used to stuff. And the interesting thing in adaptation is that we get used to stuff faster than we think. So you think to yourself, oh, I'll really be happy if I'll have a new car. And it's true, you get happier if you get a new car, but then your happiness goes down, and it goes down faster than you anticipate. Then you say, well, I'm not as happy anymore. What made me happy last time I bought a car? I was happy. This time, let me renovate my kitchen. And you, renovate your kitchen, you get happier, and so on. And this is called the hedonic treadmill, where we run in place. We're trying to use money to buy happiness. And there's a couple of things to think about how not to get into this issue. One of them is to buy experiences rather than buying stuff. So imagine that you buy a sofa. You buy a sofa and you think to yourself, oh, I'll have this sofa for a really long time. I'll derive lots of pleasure from it going on, but it's not true. You buy a sofa, you get happy, and then you get used to it, and the happiness goes down. On the other hand, you might be thinking, well, if I'll go scuba diving, it will be something that I'll enjoy the moment I scuba dive, and then it will go away. Turns out it's not. You enjoy it maybe when you scuba dive, but then the experience changes you and stays with you for longer after the fact. So that's one of the things.
It's like buying tickets to see a show that you will think about for the rest of your life.
Stay with you. Not all shows.
Hashtag not all shows.
So that's one aspect is to buy experiences rather than stuff. The second one is to be careful about what kind of things we spend. So if you think about happiness as being relative, it means that we want to live at a level below what we can afford, and then from time to time splurge. So if we just get used to living at a certain level, we'll get used to it rather quickly. So imagine, for example, you think to yourself, let's say you like wine, and you say to yourself, what kind of wine should I spend? Should I spend in the $12 range, $24 range, $50 or $100? Whatever range or more, whatever range you spend in, you'll get used to it at some point. And you'll not be happy, right? If you're in year 2 of drinking wine and you're spending $100, you're just as happy. And if you're year 2 and you're spending $24, there's not a big difference. So the thing you want to do is to figure out what's the level of spending that you want constant, and then from time to time increase things. So that will be one elaborate piece of advice.
Those were 2.
Okay, so to stop here.
We could keep going. We'll get back to more. We'll get back to more advice. I mean, there's so much that we can talk about that's in the book that is just some of the stuff that you studied, because money is so hard to think about. Right? We all think about money all the time, but we don't think about how we think about it. It's an obsession. And no one watches the TV show Lifestyles of the Poor and Decrepit. Right? They watch Lifestyles of Rich and Famous or Keeping Up with the Kardashians, not Keeping Up with the Kardashians' butler. Right? We're always thinking about money, and yet we don't think about it well. No matter how much money we have, we were on a radio show earlier today, and some of the callers were complaining about having to pay their bills, and then some were complaining about boats and planes that they bought and not getting value out of it. Right? Now, we should all have such problems.
This was NPR, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Elitist liberals. We all worry about, like, even those of us that really understand money, that understand economics, like before making it big, or before making it here, I went to Princeton. And the economics professors there included like Ben Bernanke and Alan Blinder and that other white guy. And I studied economics and I understood it, but I couldn't really apply it because I'm a human. And all of us really are human. And we have our human concerns, the psychology that affects our ability to think about money because it's so emotional, it's so difficult to figure out. I remember when I first stumbled upon Dan's work and we started doing things together, it struck me as true because how can we expect humans to figure out, for instance, retirement savings? Right? Retirement savings, you have to figure out when you're going to stop working, then how much longer you're going to live, then how much money you need each year, what the cost of living is, what the market's going to do, what your investments are going to do, how your health is going to be. All these calculations, they expect humans to figure that out when many humans can't believe it's not butter. Right? It's just a challenge that I don't think is fair to put on people.
By the way, with retirement, it's also, there's really no opportunity to fix things, right? It's not as if you can get a second chance. If you get to age 65 and you got it wrong, there's no...
You can hope your kids did better than you. you can move in with them. But imagine life without money, right? We can talk about how it's difficult and it's a challenge, but imagine if we didn't have money. We wouldn't have so many incredible things. We wouldn't have like wine and art and philosophy. There wouldn't be time for it. We wouldn't be in this big building, right? You wouldn't have rent-controlled apartments. There wouldn't be Zabars. They don't accept guilt, right? But it's important to think about life without money, so not just we appreciate what money gives us, but so we understand what money is about. So for just a moment, I'd like everyone just to close their eyes and imagine there's no money. Open your eyes, you wake up, start your day. You need coffee, right? It's going to be a long day. Go to the coffee shop, grab your little bag, your barter bag. You go there, you say, tell you what, I have some leftover broccoli and a couple dirty socks you can use to clean the counter, so you can have a cup of coffee. Maybe he agrees. You have your coffee, you get in your car. You're driving to work, and you need to get gas. Pull into the gas station, you don't have anything he wants. The person there says, well, you can clean the bathroom. Clean the bathroom, I'll give you half a tank of gas. So you clean the bathroom, then you go to work. You're at work and you want to negotiate a raise. You go into your boss's office, you're like, listen, I've been here for 10 years. I'd like an extra bushel of spinach, some more gallons of water, and I'd like 10 chickens. All right? He said, I can't give you 10 chickens. I can give you 7 chickens right now. Say, okay, fine. You go back to your desk, right? You open up your abacus. You start working. End of the day, you're excited. You go to a furniture store. There's a sofa you've been waiting to get. Turns out they want 11 chickens for it, but you only have 7. There's no way to take 7/11ths of a sofa. Right? So maybe you make a deal. You know what? I'll come back in a week. I have a table I've been trying to get rid of, so I'll bring that in. You agree. Go home. Turns out one of your kids has to go to the doctor. You don't know how you're going to pay the doctor. You were just there. You already mowed his lawn. Right? So what are you going to do? And this is how our life would be. Every day, a series of negotiations and bartering and hustling, and we would just be so mentally exhausted. We wouldn't have time to do anything except just survive. And there's no way we could save. How can you save for retirement? You know, spinach goes bad. You're not going to lug around tables when you're 80. Right? We wouldn't have so many of the things we need, and that's one of the beautiful things about money. Because money can come in and represent the value of all those items. Right? Money is divisible. You can have half of $100. Right? Money can be used generally. It can be used for anything, spinach and chickens and gas. Money is storable. Right? It's not going to go bad like the spinach and other items. I mean, money ultimately is about the value of things. And Dan likes to say that money is about opportunity costs. So what is opportunity costs?
So the thing about money is that, you know, if you trade chicken and broccoli, it's one trade-off with another. Money basically represents all the things that you could buy in principle now and later. And that's how we're supposed to think about money, right? So every time you go to buy a cup of coffee or dinner or whatever it is, you're supposed to think about what am I giving up now and in the future for this privilege of getting this cup of coffee or whatever it is. The problem is that it's really hard to think about those trade-offs. I mean, think to yourself about when was the last time you bought anything and you thought about opportunity cost. People just don't do it. We're supposed to do it, but it's really hard to do. A few years ago, we went to a Toyota dealership, and there were some people who were coming to buy a new car, and we caught these people, not caught, we talked to them, and we said, if you were going to go ahead and buy this car, this new Toyota, what are you giving up? What are you giving up? And people had no answer. And they had no answer because they never thought about it. They knew what would be the payment, but they haven't thought about what they're giving up. So then we pushed them, and we said, look, something has to give up. You're going to spend all this money buying a new car, true on payment, but what's going to give? And the most common answer we got was, if I buy a Toyota, I can't buy a Honda. Which means that people traded off in the same time frame, in the same category. Now, what people should have said is something like, I'm giving up 2 weeks of vacation for the next 3 years, and 700 lattes, and 17 books, and doing some kind of intertemporal trade-off with the future, but also across categories. The thing is, it's really hard to think about money. And this is kind of the interesting trick, is that the main value of money is that it represents everything we could buy with it. But this amazing benefit is also the reason that it's really hard to think about money, because what exactly are we giving? Imagine that I gave you now $4. How happy would you be, and what would you exactly get? How would you think about it? You're supposed to think about the best thing you could do with $4, but that's not how we think about it. You say, oh, it's $4. If I gave you a cappuccino, you would be much happier, right? Even though with $4 you could buy a cappuccino, but when I say $4, you're not thinking about what's the best thing I can buy with $4. When you get a cappuccino, it's something concrete. And then on top of that, we have to recognize that it's not only that money is difficult to think about opportunity cost, but the technology is making it harder. Right? Imagine a world in which I came to you every day and I gave you $50 every morning. I said, here's $50, it's yours, spend as much as you want throughout the day. Opportunity cost would be quite clear. You would realize if you take an Uber to work, you don't have money for breakfast, and if you have a big lunch, you might not have money for dinner, and if you have you get a couple of
$120 bottle of wine.
Well, you can't. You have $50. There's no. But if you have a $45 bottle of wine, you have nothing else. Now, what would happen if I gave you all the money once a week, every Monday morning? On Monday, you wouldn't think you have an opportunity cost, but on Wednesday, you will realize that there's opportunity cost, but it will be a bit too late. What would happen if I gave you the money for the whole month? What would happen if there were taxes that you would charge a year later on April 15th? What about if I also gave you a credit card and student loans and a mortgage? Now you have to ask yourself the question of what is the opportunity cost? If I see a new bicycle and I really want this bicycle, I see something physical, tangible that I want right now, what's the opportunity cost of that? Where is it coming from? Is it coming from my credit card bill at some point? Really, really hard to think about. Actually, even if you try to do it, it's really hard. So the point is that opportunity cost is necessary to think rationally about money, but it's basically impossible. So what do? We don't think about money the right way. We develop all kinds of tricks that are not correct, they're not accurate, they're not rational, they're not perfect, but at least they help us deal with money in a way that makes us think as if we're making reasonable decisions.
Right. So it's all sorts of like value cues, I think we call it, and shortcuts, because we wouldn't suggest that every time you have a financial decision, you go to a coffee shop, you think, what else can I do with this $3? And you think of all the possibilities, right? That's just crippling. So it's reasonable to have shortcuts in your life, but sometimes those shortcuts lead us down a bad path.
That's right.
I would actually like to talk about some of the shortcuts, some of the things that really struck me. Dan's going to talk about some. These are some of the items we cover in the book, because I think in order to sort of design for our future, if you will, in order to really learn, you have to understand the mistakes that we're making. And we're not going to suggest that we change human nature, but rather we recognize human nature and use what that is to create a better tomorrow. It's not delusional at all to think we're going to change the world. One of the things that really struck me was this concept of the pain of paying. Does anybody here like pain? No? If you figure New York City, maybe a few
there's
people.
somebody at the end there.
Yeah. Pain is.
By the way, can I say something
Yeah,
about
of course.
So there was the marathon, right? And marathon is really interesting because you go. Anybody here ran a marathon ever? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you go ahead. Oh, Jim, of course. You go ahead and you see people who run marathon and they don't seem happy. If you were an alien and you came to Earth and you looked at people running marathon, you would say, these people did something terrible. They did some terrible crime to society, and society is now punishing them in this terrible way.
This is why I don't run. This is why I don't run.
And let's hope that they will forgive them at some point if they do this. But we looked at athletes, and we found that they have something we call benign masochism, where they basically learn to enjoy the pain, right? And for example, professional cyclists have tremendous amount of pain. It's the same muscle group working against friction all the time, really, really hard. But they learn to attribute something good for the pain. And on a side note, we're trying now to figure out whether we could get people with side effects with medications, not to enjoy the side effects, but to suffer less. To kind of go through this process of how people who are running or doing whatever are learning to enjoy the pain in some way, and can we infuse that into medical treatment so that people suffer less, for example, from chemotherapy. But anyway, that was about a process of getting people to enjoy pain.
But I think there might be an application. In a minute, I'll explain more about the pain of paying. It's the idea that when you pay for something, you feel pain, and physiologically. Maybe people that do like retail therapy, right? The people that are really depressed and so they go and buy stuff, maybe it's secretly some sort of masochistic thing. They want to get into debt.
Feel.
You think so?
No.
No. Well,
Pain of paying.
I do the ideas, you tell me they're wrong. That's how the book came about, and why it took 4 years. The pain of paying is, as I said, this concept that when we spend, we feel pain, right? Because we're giving up something that we have. And normally, pain is a good thing, right? Normally, pain tells us that something's wrong, and we adjust our behavior, right? The pain of a broken leg tells us that we should go get medical help. Put our hand on a hot stove, that pain tells us not to get burned. Right, you call up Megan Flaherty in 7th grade and say, it's Jeff, you want to go out? And she says, Jeff who? And you become a comedian, I guess. We learn from pain, or we should. But again, as humans, what we tend to do is we tend to numb the pain. Instead of changing that behavior, we protect ourselves from it. Jerry Seinfeld has a bit about helmets. Right? He talks about how humans were doing all these things that were bashing our heads in, and instead of not doing head bashing things, we put a little piece of plastic on our head, right? And that's what we do with pain. Right? Instead of feeling that pain and using the feeling of that pain to assess the opportunity cost, to say, hey, should we continue? Should we spend now? Is this a good choice? Instead of feeling that, we numb it. And the way we numb it is through time or attention. First, time. What I'm talking about is the time between paying for something and consuming it. Right? Between paying and having the experience. For instance, consider a nice vacation. Right? You can pay for a vacation 3 ways. You can pay for it beforehand, right? All inclusive, just pay that amount. You pay for that, say a month before. That feels a little painful, but then you've got a month of anticipation and excitement, and then when you get to the vacation, you don't think about money, you just enjoy it. Well, you drink, you swim, you drink, you surf, you drink, you snorkel, you drink, you have more to drink. You have a good time. You could also pay after the experience, right? You pay at the end when you check out of the resort. Now, while you're experiencing things, you're not always thinking about money. Maybe you have some hesitation. But at the end, you get the bill, right? And you look back on it, and you start to question, oh, was it really worth it to spend all that money, on that one dinner? Right? You have a little bit of regret. Now, the most painful time is to pay during consumption. Imagine you're on vacation, and every time you want to go and have a surfboard or have a snorkel, you have to walk up, not only just suck in your gut, you have to pay money. Right? Every time you order a drink, you have to see the price and you have to pay. You have to pay for the wine. It would be a very unpleasant experience. Right? Dan did an experiment. Was it a real experiment or a thought experiment with the pizza?
It was not an experiment. There was no control group, but I did it with my students.
Yeah, I did it with the students where he would, he brought in pizza and he told everyone they could pay per bite.
Not can, they have to.
Oh, they have to pay per bite.
They have to pay 25 cents. It's not expensive. 25 cents per bite.
So imagine that, right? Imagine you're given a pizza and it's pay per bite. A lot of you be like, oh, one. Are you going to enjoy that pizza? Shove it in your mouth, maybe if you're like in college or something, but for the most part, no.
Even they don't enjoy it. And what's interesting is they don't learn. Like you would think, okay, they'll take one big bite and they'll say, okay, I've learned, but it's really hard. Like you sit there with a pizza and you could push a little bit more in and it can become more economically efficient, and it's really hard not to do it.
Right. So we're having pizza later. So there are the 3 different times you can pay for things. And of course, the wider the distance between paying and consuming, the more pleasurable that consumption is and the less painful the paying is. Right? And there are a few things out there you'll recognize that use this distance between paying and consumption sort of against us. Amazon Prime. Right? Pay $99 beginning of the year. The rest of the year, free shipping. Right? But it's not really free. You've paid for it. It just doesn't feel that way each time you go there. And then there are other effects. You suddenly think of Amazon as being free. Right? That's where you shop, and then Jeff Bezos takes over the world. And of course, credit cards. Right? Speaking of little pieces of plastic we use to shield ourselves. Credit cards, when you go to a meal and you sign the credit card bill, you're not paying right then. You're making a promise to pay later. Right? And then when you do get the bill, you consumed it earlier. So there's a gap of time. Right? That's one of the reasons why credit cards are so effective. The other is the attention that we pay. And the more that the pain of paying is salient, the more that we really are conscious of it, the more likely we will be to judge opportunity costs, to really think about that decision. Right? Vice versa, the less salient, the less attention we pay, the more likely we are not to consider opportunity costs. And so many things you talk about technology are now about making it so we're not aware of the paying. Right? Things like Easy Pass and automatic bill pay and Amazon, their first patent was the one-click technology, so just one hit. Right? Amazon even has a store now where you just go in, you put items in your bag, there's a little chip, and you just walk out the door. You don't even look at the prices. Right? You're not aware of the spending, and so therefore you're likely to spend more. I mean, if you think about it, this is the Upper East Side, so imagine some of you have investment portfolios. Imagine you have a $1 million portfolio, right? And you're paying your manager 1%. Would you value his or her contributions differently if they just took that 1% and maybe put on a report, or if at the end of every year you had to write a check for $10,000? If you had to feel that pain, you would really assess whether or not he or she was doing a good job. But we don't. That's just buried. That just automatically disappears.
Or think about the example you gave earlier. Like many people said that you know the price of gasoline, but don't know the price of energy at home. Mm-hmm. And this is an example where you could say, is the pain of paying always good or always bad, or should we change it? So for example, imagine that we try to increase the pain of paying for energy at home, let's say for electricity. What would we do? We would not have the energy meter outside of the house. We would have it inside of the house. We'll have it maybe in the kitchen. So imagine that you had a big meter in the middle of the kitchen, and this was your energy meter, and you had to feed it cash. And you would put, it wouldn't accept credit cards. You would put cash in the morning, and then it would draw down.
Isn't there a place in England that did that? Did they put coins in the home heating? Can you say that?
So in England, it used to be that the heaters were exactly like this, just the heaters, and you would put it in. And now they have some systems where you like buy a laundry machine, and to operate it every time, you have to put money in. So it's kind of not exactly, you're not buying it exactly, you're renting it and you're prepaying every time. And if you had a system like this, we have to admit that we would save much more energy. Again, this is New York. How many of you in the winter have your windows open? A few people are admitting it.
Because you get the radiator, there's like 10 or so people.
That's right. So it's kind of crazy because you're not paying for it directly. It's indirect and so on. If it was direct, people would feel very differently. So the pain of paying is this interesting thing that we can control how much people enjoy an experience and how much they're experiencing. And we can take some things like energy, cigarettes, things we don't want people to consume, and increase the pain of paying and therefore decrease consumption. And we can take some other things that people don't enjoy consuming but should do more often. And
so the point, what you're sort of getting at, is that there are ways to design systems to react to the pain of paying. We can do it for benefit of society and individually, and I think we really just want to make sure we're aware of it, so it's not the only people aware of it are Amazon and Apple Pay, right? It's so that we are. And I think it's about choice, because for instance, you go on that vacation, the best way to get the most pain of paying is to pay while you're doing it, or eating pizza is to pay per bite, but that's not enjoyable. Something like a vacation, a special trip, a special occasion, it's fine to not feel the pain of pain as long as you're making that conscious choice. And I think that that's what we often do, is a lot of these biases and cues are unconscious, and we hope to sort of help everyone talk about and understand what that consciousness is. And there's a great example of how to use this that we put in the book, which is why it's great, about when you go to dinner with a group of friends. And do you want to explain what that is?
Go for it.
All right. So you go to dinner with a group of friends, the end. If you have a group of friends that you go to dinner with frequently, say 4 friends, the best way to really get the most pleasure and enjoy that is for one person to pay for dinner for everyone. Now that one person is going to suffer some pain of paying, but the pain of pain they suffer isn't 4 times what they would feel. Actually, the biggest amount of pain of paying is going from 0 to something. Right? They have some pain of paying, but it diminishes little. At the same time, they get pleasure out of treating their friends, out of the kindness, out of the community, out of being kind to one another. And their friends get pleasure out of having something treated to them. So instead of 4 people suffering an equal amount of pain, one person has a little bit of pain, and the other people feel pleasure. And so in many ways, if you have a group of friends that do that, it's great to pay for everyone. And Dan and I can give you our schedules if you want to test that out. And so this is just another example of how we can use these flaws in our thinking. In this case, the flaw in our thinking is that we run away from the pain of paying. We numb ourselves to the pain, and that makes it so we don't consider opportunity cost. But we can use those flaws to our benefit. What is another flaw in our thinking that really struck you?
So I'll tell you about some experiment we did on trying to get very poor people to save in Kenya, and you'll see where this leads us. So this was a study we did in a slum called Kibera in Kenya, and we were trying to get people who live on about $10 a week to save a little bit of money. And the reason we were trying to get them to save money is not for retirement, they don't live long enough for that, but it's for a rainy day. And here's the reason. Imagine you're very poor, you live hand to mouth, and from time to time something bad happens. Maybe you had a goat, maybe your goat gave you 25% of your income, and one day your goat is sick. Now your 25% of your income is missing, you live hand to mouth, there's no access, you can't really cut down your expenses. What do? You borrow. If you're in Kibera, you might be borrowing at 10% a week. And let's say that 4 weeks later, something good happens, your goat is healthy, that's great, but you're 4 weeks behind plus interest. How do you get out of this? And this is something that happens in general to the poor, is bad things happen, what's called negative income shocks, and then things just deteriorate very, very quickly from there. If you had a bucket, maybe a lanternnier, you might have to sell them, and so on. So we wanted people to have a little bit of reserve, a rainy day fund. Now, what would happen if we said, look, you have your regular wallet in your right pocket, why don't you have a special reserved wallet for savings in your left pocket? Now, what would happen is people would spend that money, right? You walk around Kibera, there's fruit, there's water, there's a bit more kerosene, there's things to spend money on. So we said, let's create a savings system that will be easy to put money in, but hard to get it out. So we teamed up with M-Pesa. M-Pesa is the online payment company in Kenya. In Kenya, about 20% of the people have bank accounts, about 80% of the people have M-Pesa accounts. So M-Pesa is a very good system. So we got people to have an M-Pesa account, and then we got an agreement with an investment bank that every night took the money from the M-Pesa account and invested it in the Kenyan stock market. So what happened, people could tax money in, but every night the money moved to the stock market. And the reason for that is that now you couldn't get it back with texting. If you wanted the money back, you had to get on a bus, go to the city, fill a form, wait an hour, take a bus back. It could take 4 or 5 hours. And we did this on purpose. We wanted a system that was easy to put the money in, hard to get it out. So imagine that you have this system, easy in, hard out, and you give it to lots and lots of people. And now you have all kinds of experimental conditions to try and get people to save. So one group just got that system. That's the control condition. Another group got that system plus a weekly reminder that said, try and save 100 shillings, about $1 this week. Another group got the same text message, but it was framed as if it came from their kids. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. This is little Joey, whatever the name of the kid was. Try and save 100 shillings.
Name, Joey.
Try and save 100 shillings this week for the future of our family. By the way, these people know that their kids don't have cell phones. It was just a reminder of that. So we had nothing, text from kids. Another group got a 10% match. We said save up to 100 shillings, we'll give you 10%. Another group got a 20% match. Two other groups also got 10% and 20%, but they got it in what we call pre-match. You remember the notion of loss aversion. Loss aversion is the idea that people hate losing more than we enjoy gaining. If one day you lose 10%, one day you lose $10,000, that's very, very painful. If another day you gain $10,000, it's happy, but it doesn't make up for it. You have to gain about twice as much to make up for the loss. So we said, look, in a regular match condition, people put money in and then we give them the match. It's just gain. They don't see the money they did not match. What if we gave them the match in the beginning of the week, then they put their money and what they didn't match, we took it back. So for example, imagine you're in a 10% condition. If you're in the match at the end of the week, you put 40 and you get 4 more. If you're in the pre-match condition, we give you 10. You put 40, we take 6 back. So no matter what happens, you get 44, the amount is the same, but in the pre-match condition, you experience loss aversion. You see 6 shillings leave your account. So we had 10% post-match, 20% post-match, 10% pre-match, 20% pre-match, and then we had another condition with the coin about this size, and the coin had 24 numbers written on it, and we asked them to put the coin somewhere in their hut, and every week to take a knife and scratch the number for the coin for that week. Week 1, 2, 3. Scratch it this way if they didn't save, and this way if they saved. So think about all of those methods. Nothing, text from kids, 10% at the end of the week, 20% at the end of the week, 10% beginning of the week, 20% beginning of the week, and the coin. Which one do you think worked the best? So let me ask you to kind of vote. Not that your vote will change anything, but like have an opinion about which one do you think would work the best. So how many people here think the regular text would work the best? Okay, nobody, good, it didn't. How many of you think the text from the kids worked the best? Okay.
This is also an experiment in herding to see if you just go along with the people that have the most.
How many people think that the 10% at the end of the week worked the best? 20% at the end of the week? 10% beginning of the week? 20% at the beginning of the week? That's the majority. How many people think the coin worked the best? Yeah. Okay, now you are here to discuss things that have to do with rational and irrational thinking, so I don't take your opinions too seriously. You know that there must be a trick, and you're thinking perhaps differently.
By the way, when you work with Dan, I'm convinced my life is a trick at this point. And I don't know what the payoff is going to be.
Yeah.
When do we find out?
The end of the experiment. I taught a class on Coursera. It's an online platform, and the problem was that every time there was a glitch in the Coursera platform, the students were sure it was an experiment, that something was going on. So anyway, here are the results. You give the system to people, and people start saving. That's amazingly good news. It means that we want a system with self-control, that sometimes we want a system that forces us to do things that are good for our long term and doesn't let us spend money. That's good news. Text once a week helped a lot. 10% at the end of the week helped some more. 20% at the end of the week, just like 10%, no difference. 10% in the beginning of the week helped some more, loss aversion works. 20% beginning of the week, just like 10%. And kids were just like 10 and 20% in the beginning of the week. And by the way, it's an amazing force to think about kids as having this amount of impact, like 20% plus loss aversion.
I'll remember that when my daughter wakes me up at 3 this morning.
That's right. You're 20% plus loss aversion.
Exactly.
But the big surprise in the experiment was the coin, because the coin basically doubled savings compared to everything else. And now the question is why? And I have to admit, I was interested in the coin. I didn't think it would be this effective. our research center with Duke is called the Center for Advanced Hindsight. And we use this name to remind ourselves that we didn't necessarily kind of, after the fact, you can say, oh yes, I knew that all along.
Yeah.
But we don't always predict everything. So how did I come up with this coin? Why did I do it? So I was in Soweto. Soweto is another slum in South Africa. And I walk around Soweto kind of trying to have a better insight into what's going on. And I see a father buying funeral insurance for a week. And he gets a certificate for this funeral insurance. And very ceremoniously, he gives it to his son. And just to be clear, funerals in South Africa are very, very expensive. Even in slums, people spend up to 2 years of income on funerals. It's the equivalent of a bar mitzvah or a wedding in South Africa.
Do they have the same type of music and dancing at bar mitzvahs?
Yeah. Oh, not exactly, but it's a celebration. It's very, very festive.
They don't have a bunch of Jews dancing around at the bar mitzvah?
With the klezmers.
No.
And this guy bought funeral insurance for a week, right? So it means that it will cover him only if he dies in the next 7 days. Right? These are very poor people. They buy small amount of soap and a small amount of insurance and so on. But when he gave that certificate to his son, I was thinking, without giving the certificate to his son, what would the family see that day? Imagine you're very poor and you're diverting some money to savings or to insurance. What is the family going to see? They're going to see less. It's going to be something less tonight. If you're very poor, there will be less food, something is going to be less tonight. If you're not very poor, you'll also have less. But if you're a breadwinner and you get credit from the family from getting the family to live better, if you're diverting money into something invisible like insurance or saving, where are you getting your credit from? So the coin basically got the family to realize that it's not less, it's just different, right? It's still not food, but it was somewhere in the hut, it was visible, the whole family could see it, and it was understanding that there's still investment in the family, you just don't see it on the table. But more generally, the thought that I've been thinking about is, think about this money revolution. So 1,000 years ago, how did people save? We saved with basically goats and chickens, right? And when people saved in goats and chickens, you could come home from work and you could see how many goats you have and you could see how many goats your neighbor has, and you could compete on who has more goats. We could compete on who has more savings, more assets. Then we invented money, then we invented digital money, and now we don't see how much our neighbors are saving.
We do see how much they're spending.
We do see how much they're spending.
You're keeping up with the Joneses, you see the cars, you see the paint on the house.
That's right.
There's no way to show what they're saving, which
That's
is more important.
And we would compete on anything. We would compete on anything as long as we could see it and we could measure it. But in general, as a society, the way we designed money, not intentionally, but the way we design money is such that we get to see what people are spending and we don't get to see what people are saving. And because of that, we compete for spending. There was recently a study that showed that when people win the lottery, their neighbors start spending more money, right? And you could think, oh, these crazy Americans, no, these were Canadians.
So they spend it all on
people.
beer. They spend it all on beer, though, right?
But it's incredibly natural to compete on whenever we can. So now here's the thought. Should we change the visibility of savings, right? We could change it for ourselves so it's more visible to us. We could make it more visible within the family. We could make it abstractly visible to society. For example, we could have next to your Facebook profile whether your kids have college savings accounts or whether you have, we don't have to say the amount. We can just say what. So there's all kinds of ways to do it. But realizing that those things will become social standards and people will start competing on them, maybe the right thing to do is not to have money that is dedicated to saving and insurance completely invisible.
Well, part of that is just going back to this idea that we all are obsessed about money, but we don't really talk about it. Like, money is sort of taboo. I mean, we don't talk about it with our family. We don't talk about it, with our friends. The number one cause of divorce is money, I think in part because it's so difficult to talk about. And then if we were to have more conversations with your neighbors, like I talked to my neighbor about how to fix piping and what to do on the sidewalk and who do they get to paint their house. I don't have a conversation about who's your financial advisor, are you doing your 401k? And those things are much more important. And if we come together, we can learn from these things. We can combat the Apple Pays and the 1% investment fees. Right? But we don't value things. We talk about, oh, you got a nice big TV screen, not, oh, you are saving for your daughter's retirement or college, right? And it's a shame. And it's one thing I found just in the process of writing this book. I'm much more open talking about money because I want to learn. And I think that expression, a wise man knows himself to be a fool, but a fool opens his wallet and proves himself to be right.
Yeah. Can I say one other thing about college savings accounts? This research about the coin, it's really a research about reminder. There was another piece of research that showed that when you take kids on the day that they are born, and you randomly open to half of them college savings accounts with $500. Right? You take kids, they are born, you randomly open to half of them college savings account, and then you go and you visit those kids when they turn 4. And it turns out that kids with college savings accounts have higher social and cognitive skills. Right? And you can ask them, how can it be? How can it be that these kids are somehow more successful? Do they know that they have $500 in a college saving account? And the answer is they don't know, but their parents get a bill, a statement once a month. And the statement tells them, this kid, while still in diapers, is headed to college. And the parents don't do things that are very different, but they do read to them a little bit more, and they do buy another book from time to time. And if you think about 4 years, it's a really long time, and you could do small things every day for a very long time, and it makes a difference. And with those papers, we recently convinced the Israeli government to start a college savings account, a higher education account for every kid that is born since January 2017. And when we started this process, the people from the government said, let's just reduce the cost of education. But it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing to reduce the price of education, because then the kids who think they're going to go there anyway, their parents treat them differently. But if you have an account and you get these statements, now think about what it means. It means that it's not just about the money, it's about the statement. It's about how do we get people to think about themselves? How do we get people to think about their kids? And those things have really important feedback loops.
Right. So it's about designing systems. I mean, essentially, it's a big trend in all industries. How do you design change? And you do that. You don't try to change human behavior, human nature. You try to change the systems around them. In a minute, we're going to take some questions. I had a plan, but much like thinking about money, Dan Ariely came along. But I think the big thing for me, the reason that I was interested in working on this book, was because we don't want to tell people what to do with their money. Don't do X, Y, Z. We want to just show people how they already are doing things and why they already are doing things, and then they can decide. Like before, the idea of a vacation. If you want to overspend for a vacation, go for it. Just make that conscious choice. And all of these things that are in the book and that Dan studies about human behavior, they don't just apply to money. They apply to life. They apply to politics and relationships. No one ever lay on their deathbed wishing they could spend more time with their money, right? And no one ever just wondered about how they could. I totally lost my train of thought. Yeah. Is that a good ending?
It's a wonderful ending to end you.
So I actually have a very good ending, because there's a thing called peak end rule in behavioral science, where no matter what happens, if the ending is good, we'll really enjoy it. It was actually a study with colonoscopies, believe it or not.
Go ahead, describe it. It's a good study.
Yeah, it is a good study. So can I have a volunteer? Basically, if they found that in a colonoscopy, if the ending was...
No, go ahead. Describe the thing. Give it some detail.
So colonoscopy involves sort of a thing going up a thing. And if you pull it out quickly, it's more painful, right, in that moment. But if you pull it out slowly, it's like a slow, less painful experience. And those that had the slow removal of the thing inside the thing actually looked back on their colonoscopy more fondly.
So it was actually a little bit worse. So here
I'm trying to get these. They probably just eat dinner. I don't want to...
Colonoscopy is unpleasant, particularly when the device goes around corners. Okay. Half the people...
Anybody have a butt with a corner?
Not the butt. So half the people had the regular colonoscopy. They started, they ended, the regular colonoscopy. The other half of the people, just before they pulled it out, they waited for 5 minutes. So some people had this length of colonoscopy. The other group had the same length of colonoscopy, plus a 5 minute where the probe did not move, but was stationary, just about to leave.
And they thought about, the whole time they think about baseball, right?
So if you think about it, the first group had an unpleasant experience. The second one had an unpleasant experience plus a slightly less unpleasant experience. But that final thing was not positive by itself. Nobody would want the colonoscopy edge in them for 5 minutes. So it wasn't a positive thing, it was just less negative. What happened? The second group enjoyed or suffered less from the colonoscopy. So the point is that ends really color our experience, right? And if you think about it, there's many things in life where the end point is not ideal. You go on vacation, the last moment might be paying the bill, delayed flights, lost luggage, right? It's kind of a bad way to end things. And in general, we find that it's really good to try and end on a high note.
Speaking of which, you may have noticed I've got my Halloween socks on, and I've also got Halloween candy. So
whoa.
At the end, after questions, before signing book, you're all welcome to come have some candy as part of the end of this colonoscopy of a talk.
Very good.
Until then, we have some time for questions. Do you have any questions about anything? Yes, over here, sir.
Why is it that some people are able to think about money in a concrete way so that the credit card is real cash, and other people are in la la land and the credit card isn't real, and then they wake up at the end of the month and say, oh, wait a minute.
Okay. Let me just repeat the question. Question is, how come some people are able to think about things like credit cards, money in a concrete way, think about credit card as that cash that they're spending, and others are in la la land doing some sort of dance and don't think about that way?
Yep.
Why are some people better than others, Dan?
So in general, I think that we tend to attribute lots of differences between people to individuals, where in fact it's more about their environment than individuals, right? We have a tendency to think that whatever we do differently, it's because we're men and women or Generation X or Generation Y or whatever. Mostly, it's not about individual difference, it's about different in environments. And I'll give you one example for this. There is something called depletion. And depletion is the idea that as we exert our willpower, we get exhausted. So imagine in the realm of food, you go to the office and there's muffins, and then there's YouTube and Facebook, and there's temptation after temptation after temptation, and you try to fight temptation, like lifting a weight, and at some point you just get exhausted and you give up. It turns out that if you're poor, every decision you make is consequential. We said earlier, what happened if I gave you $50 a day? If you're poor, every decision you make comes at an expense of something else. If you take a bus, you can't do this. If you do this, you can't do that. And the poor get incredibly exhausted mentally very, very quickly, and they fall for temptation much more. So you could say, oh, it's not about it. You could say, oh, it's the personality of the individual. It turns out you take University of Chicago undergrads and you put them in this mindset of depletion, and very quickly they behave very badly. So I would think that everybody, there might be some exceptions, but I would say everybody would fail in thinking about credit cards differently than cash, and our ability to do something about it might be because of your mindset, depletion, or maybe some rules that you've adopted. One of the tools we have to fight with some of our irrational tendencies is not to let our flawed computation take over, and instead have a rule, like I always pay my credit card bill on time, or I never go drinking with my credit card, or things like that. Those rules are very, very helpful. So I don't know exactly what you have in mind, but I don't think in general it will be individual differences. It will probably be situational differences and maybe some personal rules.
Yep. More questions. Back here. Young lady, go ahead.
Too many questions, but can I ask two, please?
Start with one.
There's opportunity cost to
Yeah.
questions.
First question, what was the most fascinating thing you learned from your summer vacation, this long hiking trip?
And the,
Second question, throughout your
that's for you.
behavioral economics, psychology career, did you do any experiments on how to keep more interest about your partner in a long-term relationship?
Great. Good questions. I think one may be a very personal question. The question is, what did you learn? Dan this year turned 50. Yay, he made it. And
Hence the interest in the colonoscopy.
yes, exactly. And the details about there's like a corner and stuff. I don't know about. I'm never turning 50.
December 19.
That's the first one or the follow?
First one.
So you're doing.
Yeah.
All right.
This
So-
is the real celebration.
So on December 20th, our talk will be standing. So the question is, what did you, Dan, learn? He's had a year of celebration, and part of that was a month-long hike in
Yep.
Israel, where you would think you wouldn't be doing stuff, but there kept being emails. And the second question was basically, how can she save her relationship?
So I went on a month-long hike. This was the Israel Trail. I went from the north to the south of Israel. And I invited either people I knew or people I didn't know to join me for a day. So every morning I met 2 or 3 people, and we had 3 rules for the trail. The first one is no phones from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. The second was whatever is said on the trail stays on the trail. Very good
Like
rule.
Vegas, right?
And the third rule, that everybody had to introduce themselves with an embarrassing story. And I got to both share and tell a lot of embarrassing stories, and it was really fantastic. It's amazing way to get to meet people. And I'll tell you one of my embarrassing stories. I can't tell you other people's. So this was maybe 2 years after I was injured, and I had a friend in the hospital who thought that maybe it's time for me to go on a date. And she asked me if I'm interested, and I said sure, and she said she'll ask her friends if anybody would be willing to date me. And at some point she came back and she said she has somebody who might be willing to date me. And we agreed to go to the beach and have ice cream. So my friend drove me. I couldn't drive at the time. We went to the beach. We met this lovely woman. We get ice cream. We sit looking at a little bit after sunset. And this woman that I just met 2 minutes ago asked me a question about hospital. And I don't know why, but I went into a really long, painful discussion about a nurse I really hated. I don't know what exactly triggered that, but this was a nurse I truly hated. And I didn't talk about him for 2 years, and all of a sudden kind of the gates open. And I talk about what an awful human being he was, and how he was cruel, and he was unpleasant, and he was enjoyed, I think, inflicting pain on the patients. And I would do everything I could to try and change my schedule around so he would never treat me. And if he was in charge on the weekend, I would try to get operated on Friday so that nobody would touch me. I was a terrible, terrible human being. And I really hated him. And I went into this really long, deep discussion. And I talk, and I talk, and I talk. And after 15 minutes or so, I just feel like I've unloaded. I kind of finished. I don't know if you tell. Okay, I cleaned myself up. And I breathe deeply, and I look at her, and she says, "And what's his name?" And I tell her his name, and she stands up, and she said, "It's my father." And I haven't seen her since.
Maybe this is her? Is this the granddaughter?
So one of the many things I learned was that embarrassing stories are a great way to connect. Now, when they happen, it's a different story, but later on, it's a great way to connect. In terms of the question of how to keep things interesting in the relationship,
Using science.
It really is the question. It really is a question of adaptation, right? Once we get used to things, everything becomes less interesting, right? So and the question is, how do we decrease adaptation? So there's one study I really love by Eli Finkel, And it's a study that basically shows that if you ask people 4 times a year to write something about the relationship in the last few months, but not from their perspective, but from a third-party perspective, right? So whenever you're in a relationship, you have your perspective, the other person has their perspective. As long as you stick with your perspective, it's a little harder to understand the other person. But if you try to write about this relationship from a third party, like how God or somebody else would look at it from a third party, people do understand each other eventually better. So that's one thing. The second thing is that there's a really interesting analysis showing that the benefit of sex lasts about 50 hours. So it really, we all know that sex gets people to be closer, but it really lasts for a very long time, much more than we anticipate. So having at least every 50 hours.
See, we've all gotten some value out of this evening already. All right, sir, yes, here.
I won't ask you how you studied that last stat. My question is, it's a little bit like the credit card sort of thing. Let's say I think we're fairly responsible, so we get a lot of the concept off the thoughts, etc. Raising children and wanting to pass values down to them, and not wanting to have them be these frugal, cheapskates who are hung up and have money issues. Passing values down in a society that gives a very mixed message than some of these thinking about longer term values or opportunity cost, and any sort of general ideas you have in that area.
The question's about teaching kids financial responsibility, how to think about money in a way, but yet not be misers, not be over frugal.
In an environment where I think they may get that message at home, but they're not getting it in a broader society.
Well, I think just one thing that we already sort of brought up was this idea of like starting a savings account or a college savings or otherwise, and having them be aware of that. Right? There's studies that show that if they have savings early on, it just becomes of value to them. That savings, even if it's not about learning to save, but it's about understanding that money isn't just something to frivolously spend, is one thing that you can do.
Yeah. So the literature on what's called asset building is very important, right? It basically says that you take people and you just give them an asset. If you're very poor, for example, and you have no assets, like imagine that you had some debt. The common wisdom is to say, if you have some money, pay down your debt. But it turns out if you don't pay just your debt, but you create a small asset and you start thinking about yourself as having an asset, your outlook changes on life. So one thing, as Jeff was saying, is it's useful to have an asset, to feel that you have some control over it. I will tell you that the area of trying to figure out how to get kids to think in reasonable ways about money is something there's basically no research on this. And it's because it's hard to do. It's hard to do longitudinal research, and it's really hard to do research on kids. The ethics of doing research on kids is very complex, right? We can say, oh, your kids will do this treatment and your kids will be this treatment. It's very tough. I'll tell you what we do with our kids is they do get an allowance. They don't get money for chores, right? The idea is that you're part of a household. We all have responsibilities. Just because you do the dishes or do something doesn't entitle you to something. But we do give our kids allowances. But they have 3 containers. And they have to divide their allowances equally between money for themselves, for somebody they know, and somebody they don't know. And the logic is to say, yes, you do have some money and you have some control, and we want you to understand decisions, right? If you get this, you don't get this, and you have to make some trade-offs. But it's also that you want to give money away to people that you know, and you want to give some away to people you don't know, and it's kind of creating a standard. Now, I'm not sure that this is the exact right allocation, but it does say there is opportunity cost and there is a responsibility between you and other people in the world. So that's just my personal advice, but there's really no studies. Incredibly important topic.
If you want to volunteer your children for a study. More questions. Let's get this side of the room over here. Yes, sir, right here.
That money is a taboo. I'm curious about the reasons why, and whether it's the same for poor people and people who are less poor.
Why it's a taboo subject?
Why is it such a taboo?
That's a good question,
Yeah.
Dan.
So there's a couple of places that are taboo, right? It's interesting that we use purchases as signaling of wealth, right? So we all know that a Honda costs less than a BMW, costs less than, I don't know, an Audi, Ferrari. I mean, there's a range of cars, and we could probably all name what it is. And by buying a car, you basically signal how much wealth you have. But if instead you went to your accountant and you said, "Give me a certified letter of what's my asset," and you just wore it on your shirt, it will be much more direct signaling, but not in good taste, right? Now, why is it? It's because when you buy a car, you're signaling money, but you're also trying to signal taste. You basically kind of, or at least you pretend, you're signaling taste as well. Somehow the signal for its own value, just signaling for its own value, it just seems like it's hollow in some important way. It's too intentional and so on. The other thing about telling other people exactly how much you have is that you're creating a difference between you and them that is incredibly clear. So imagine that, how much money do you make? just an example. Give me a range, like it could be within like $10 up.
But here, watch this. Do you use Viagra?
Have you ever? Don't use now.
No, but have you? Is a study that men are more willing to admit whether or not they use Viagra than how much they've saved for retirement. Think about what on one level seems like a more embarrassing fact, but yet that is how tight we are about money.
And the thing about it is that it would create a difference between us, right? If you make a little bit more than me, it would put you up. There's something incredibly hierarchical about that, and one of us is going to be unhappy if we talked about this. And not many things are like that. That the moment you have you express some attribute of your life, that I would immediately feel either above or below. And money has this. And
is that partly because money is so specific and measurable? Like having a Ferrari, even if you're driving a Toyota, you can say, well, that's in poor taste. Right? That guy doesn't know what
That's
he's
right.
doing.
Oh, this is how they choose. Money is both monotonic, right? More is better, right? Where you say there's other things that are not better, right? If I said how many I don't know, minutes a week do you spend exercising? Yeah, I mean there's some utility, but maybe I say, oh, it's too much, right? Where money is, it's more is better. We measure it. Even small differences are measurable, and it's very precise. So it creates this very extreme social hierarchy the moment you say it. But by the way, it's not just that we don't, and this fact that money, because of its measurable tendency, is creating a hierarchy, is also true within a relationship, right? When you have two people in a relationship, people contribute different things. Some people have better sense of humor. Some people have, all kinds of skills. Some people make more money than other people. It's just one of many attributes that come to a relationship. But how much money you make is the only attribute from all of those that is so measurable and precise. And because of that, it gets too much weight in the power question of a relationship. And we can ask questions about how would we, for example, engineer bank accounts if we wanted to take away some of the exaggerated power in earning.
Yeah, we often talk about how money becomes a substitute for the worth of an action or an accomplishment. How when you talked about visiting Israel and people, and you just publish a book, and it was like, well, how much does it pay, right? Or get on television, well, how much does it pay? When we can't measure we can measure money, even if that isn't really ultimately what matters. Yep. And so that just makes it that much more sensitive.
Let me say one other thing about this. You said what happens in other cultures or people who are more poor. Yeah. They don't necessarily talk more. In fact, there's some evidence that they talk less, and they do lend to each other much more. But here's one interesting thing that happened in poor African community in the US is if you get your paycheck and you cash it and you get home and you have cash and somebody asks you for money, you kind of have to give it. Like if you wonder why do you sometimes see poor people with new sneakers, it's because they get their paycheck and they say, if I go home with money, somebody will ask me for this money that I'll have to give. I might as well get new sneakers. At least I'll get something from this. So they're trying to figure out how to at least get something from the money, not being forced to give it away. We are now trying to think about a mechanism that would allow them to say, I wish I could give you, but I don't have it, right? You could say, if for example, some of your money was automatically deducted for savings, or you would get it slowly over the next 2 weeks rather than in a lump sum, you could credibly say, I'm sorry, I wish I could give you, but I just don't have some. Sometimes people want to be able to say.
Right. And isn't that the promise of technology? Dan and I, particularly I'm very skeptical of financial technology. I think it's just designed to get us to spend more and more freely without thinking about it. But the promise is that maybe you can get bank accounts to those that otherwise wouldn't have access. Maybe you can set up systems where every week they have a savings goal. Mm-hmm. And so the hope is that more people invest in those sorts of technologies than the ones that get us to spend. A few more questions over here, sir, in the sweater with the white shirt underneath.
So tomorrow we'll be voting.
Don't forget to vote, everybody, tomorrow. Unless you're voting for the wrong people, then forget to vote.
A lot of people will be kind of evaluating various priorities. Some of those are the value of various public assets. I think in some ways those can be dollarized or quantified sometimes. I think I read a study that said that every tree in New York is worth $3,000 based on property value and energy savings and things like that. So do you have thoughts on if that's a good idea in the public realm? How might it be done, or is it just too logical for people?
So I think
He'll answer that question because I'm not sure I've totally understood.
I think the question really is about what we call sacred values. Right? So how do we value a life? Let's just talk about life, which is it's incredibly painful and clear. For $10,000, we can improve roads in a way that would prevent a death. Right? That's about the cost of a life, if you think about it this way. It's not that expensive, right? But we don't invest enough in roads to make up for it. There are other ways to save lives, but trading off money and things that we think is sacred is sometimes incredibly difficult. For example, think about healthcare. When you think about healthcare and you say, should everybody have healthcare, opinions vary. But if you say, what percentage of mothers who have kids who die at birth, how should those be distributed in the population between the very rich and the very poor? People think it's awful that the poor would have lots of those and the rich will have very little, but that's exactly correlated with wealth and with health insurance. And there are some things that can be priced, like life with roads, but I don't think we necessarily want to price them. Now, I don't mind pricing trees as long as we price them correctly. But there are some things in life that I think we should treat as human rights, as basic human rights, and not try to price them in a cost-benefit analysis. Right. Selling kidneys, do we really want to? You could say, we don't have enough kidneys in the U.S. market. Let's create a market for kidneys. We would start paying people for kidneys. I don't think it's going in the right direction.
We talk in the book about how many times people add the idea of fairness to the price of something to decide whether or not they should buy it. And we say, that's something that we should be aware that we do. Sometimes we do it incorrectly. Like if a locksmith spends an hour fumbling around, that's not worth more than someone who opens it in a second, but we think it is because it looks like more effort, more fair. But there are times when fairness matters, like when, what's his name, Shkreli raised the price of that cancer drug by 1 billion%. People were outraged and said it wasn't fair. Maybe economically it made sense, but fairness matters, and it brought down the price. And I think that what Dan is getting at is economic considerations, cost-benefit analysis. I talked about my book about cheating, where I talked at his class, and in a cost-benefit analysis, you should cheat because you're never going to get caught. But then there's ethics, and there's morality, and there's fairness, and those things do have a value, even if you can't put a dollar figure on it. I think we got time for like 2 more, unless they're long questions. Someone over here, right here. You're next.
So you started off the talk by talking about the importance of experiences, and now every brand is trying to appeal to millennials because we love experiences. But one of the things that I've noticed is with casual dating and the rise of apps like Tinder, I've done like unofficial polls, and so many men feel like they're wasting so much money on experiences that aren't amounting to anything. So,
Wow. Every 50 minutes, they have an experience that doesn't.
people are going on 4 dates a week with all these first-time dates. Do you feel like there is a generational change, clearly in the way we think about money, but also just in terms of what we value? And I would love your thoughts on that.
So they have experiences that don't mount too much. What was the expression?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem to lead to anything. In the past, perhaps dating seemed more intentional, that you felt like you're investing in a future relationship.
And this is, you're saying, your informal poll is that the men felt like this wasn't going anywhere?
Yeah,
This is crazy
So-
talk. What is
they get to go on a lot of first dates, and even if it doesn't end up in a relationship, at least they got a free drink out of it.
Yeah.
Oh, so you're
So-
incorporating the fact that the men are paying because we still have that thing going on. Okay.
So a couple of things. So first of all, when I talked about experiences, I didn't mean dating, and no, seriously, because dating is usually not a pleasant experience. It's not something that you could say, I really want to go on 17 dates with 17 different people. It's not an objective. It's a necessary step to something else. It's not the experience that we're after. So when I say we want experiences rather than things, it's good experiences that we want, like something that we want. There are lots of things to say about dating. I think part of it is that we. Okay, so let me describe a study, and then I'll tell you what it is. So in this study, people learn to develop, to shoot pictures and develop them, right? So people take pictures, think not digital pictures, and then they pick one, and we said we're going to send it to England to be enlarged. And in 2 weeks, you'll get a huge version of the one picture you chose from the hundreds of pictures that you took. And some people are just told that, and some people are told, but when you get back your picture, you can change your mind. You'll get it, you can change your mind, and then if you change your mind, we'll send it back, and you'll get your other choice. So one group gets their picture, they're very happy. The second group get their picture, do you want to change your mind? People don't want to change your mind, but they're less happy. Why? Because for those 2 weeks, they kept on saying, did I make the right choice? There is something about relationship where you commit to somebody and you don't keep on asking yourself, is this the right choice? So imagine a relationship where you wake up every morning, you look lovingly into your partner's eyes, and you say, what do you say, honey? Should we do it for another day or not? And you keep on looking at other options. And other options, you see.
So opportunity cost does not apply to relationships.
If you think, the problem is that you have a bias because the person that you're with, you see the pluses and the negatives. The person you're not with, you see more pluses. I mean, I haven't done a lot of this online dating, but when I did many years ago, people looked amazing. It was just like, you look online and you say the world is just full of wonderful people. It's unbelievable. So I think the combination of this all these wonderful, amazing things that are just one swipe away, basically are decreasing your ability to enjoy a relationship. So if you and I were going to redesign Tinder, I think what we would do is we would basically automatically block people once they're in a once they've started a discussion, because this idea that you can switch every time is actually decreasing our ability to enjoy a relationship.
The real challenge, I think, when it comes to dating is that only two perfect women have already been taken. And with that ass-kissing note, that is going to be all the time we have for questions and answers. We're going to be outside signing books. I'm not sure where they buy them, but you can figure that out. Thank you to the 92nd Y for having us. Come have some candy. Come have candy.